Best in Employment Law, featured on CNN Money, consistently ranked as a top 10 tier employment attorney by Expertise Connections, a human resources consultant, expert, and advocate. Informational, inspirational, and entertaining. One of the most talked about and progressive shows on social media. Legal Views with attorney Sheila R. Stewart.
Welcome to Legal Views with attorney Sheila R. Stewart. We are ecstatic. We are excited that we have the one and only Bishop Melvin J. Smith with us on today. He is going to give us some valuable information as it relates to domestic violence. He has done a tremendous job doing advocacy work for women. And so who else to have to kick off Domestic Violence Awareness Month other than Bishop Melvin J. Smith? But before we go into get you ready to hear our expert on today, Bishop Melvin J. Smith, we just want to tell you a little bit about us. You are tuned in to Legal Views with attorney Sheila R. Stewart. Please know that the expressions and the views of the Legal Views show only represent our views, and we are not allowing these views to be connected with any law firms, agencies, or any particular church. Now, God has expanded our platform. We are now on Amazon Fire TV. We are also on Roku, Apple TV, the Daily Gospel International, and the Daily Gospel Network. Okay, as well as Facebook and YouTube. So be sure to follow us on these different channels. We air live on at 5 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Central Time. And our guest today is the one and only Bishop Melvin J. Smith. Bishop Smith, say hello to our audience on today.
Greetings. God bless you. First of all, attorney Sheila Stewart, I do thank you for this opportunity. I do not take it lightly. It is an honor to be with you on this program entitled Legal Views with the one and the only attorney Sheila Stewart. You're doing such a great job to the community and to society by helping getting information to the people. Thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your kind words, and that is what we are here for. We want to get information to you. Information that can help you build your life, information that can help you change your life. Now, as I stated earlier, October has been designated as Domestic Violence International Month. This was identified in 1989. Since 1989, we have acknowledged this month, and we have acknowledged survivors of domestic violence. Domestic violence is very important to me. I am not a victim of domestic violence, but I know many, many women who are. And so I like to be a voice for those women who may not feel comfortable speaking about it. Many women in high ranks of society suffer from domestic violence, many women in the church, but it's a subject matter that many do not want to talk about. The violence is prevalent in every community, and it affects all people, regardless of age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender, race, religion, or nationality. Physical violence is often accompanied by emotionally abusive, controlling behavior. As part of a much larger systematic pattern of dominance and control. So that's normally what you're going to see with domestic violence. You're going to see systematic patterns of control and dominance. Domestic violence can result in physical injury, psychological injury, as well as death. The devastating consequences of domestic violence can cross generations and last a lifetime. So what am I saying here? If your grandmother was a victim of domestic violence, then normally, oftentimes, her grandchildren would be victims of domestic violence. You see that those children that are exposed to domestic violence, some kind of way, they pick men or women that's also abusive to them. And so this show is dedicated to every survivor of domestic violence, everyone that have withstood years of abuse, hardship, psychological abuse, and you've made it out. We dedicate this show for your victory, and we're proud of you. There is an estimated 10 million abuse victims annually. 10 million. Can you just think about that number? 10 million people, men and women, are abused each year. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men. 1 out of 4 men and 1 out of 3 women will have physically abusive husbands, partners, intimate partners in their lifetime. And it's starting even earlier. High school kids are now victims of domestic violence as well. So now, I want to give you this information for children that are under stress for living in a house that have domestic violence. They can look into or contact the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Now, we want to tell you a little bit more about our guest, the one and only Bishop Melvin J. Smith. He is an advocate for women. Bishop Melvin J. Smith has 5 sisters. He has a beautiful wife, and he has a young daughter. He is not a gentleman that has any type of misogynistic views. He believes in the fair treatment and equality of treatment of women. He's an attorney of 30 plus years. He has a thriving practice. He's very vocal on TV for many different issues. And it's an honor to have you here with us on today. He's a pastor and a bishop, and he cares about you. Welcome, Bishop Melvin Smith. How are you today?
Attorney Stewart, I am doing fine. I'm doing wonderful, and I am so delighted to be with you and to be with you doing what is also, it's a challenging subject, but it's a vitally important subject as well. Domestic violence is one of those evils, is what I call it. It's one of those evils that we see in every aspect of our society. Domestic violence does not discriminate. We see it in the African American community. We see it in the Hispanic community. It makes no difference whether you're making 6 figures a year or whether you're making $220 an hour. I'm being facetious. But of course, my point is that this is a problem throughout our society. Makes no difference what zip code you're in or what state or what part of the country. Domestic violence is just one of those evils that we have to deal with in our society. And I'm so happy that this platform is a voice for those victims or those ladies or those men that may suffer in violence when it becomes one being a victim to domestic violence. So I appreciate this platform.
Well, thank you. And we appreciate you taking time out. You're incredibly busy, and your concern for women and men that are in this type of a cage situation, and you wanting to speak to it. We're just very delighted to have you. Now, Bishop Smith, tell our viewers and listeners, what are some of the warning signs that one should look for an individual that's likely in a situation of domestic violence?
You know, that is a good point, and I'm glad that you asked that question, because one of the problems with domestic violence is that people suffer in silence. People suffer in silence. We find people that have been abused. And also bear in mind that the abuse can be physical, mental, emotional. There's all kinds of awful ways to abuse somebody. But when people are victims or they have encountered this evil called domestic violence, number one, you find that there's a feeling of isolation. The abuser often wants to isolate the lady or the individual that is being abused. Also, there's a sense of helplessness. There's a sense of helplessness. I can't get out of this. Where do I go from help? There's a sense of denial. It's a sense of denial. That's the way it's supposed to be. And no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And then you find situation where victims often find themselves withdrawing from mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, so that you see that pattern of them withdrawing. There's feeling of shame and guilt. There are even sometimes when the victim thinks that's the way it's supposed to be. That's not the way that it's supposed to be. But because the way that they have been abused, sometimes psychologically, emotionally, they feel as if they deserve it. Such stuff such as, oh, if I could just be a little nicer, or if I prepare dinner better, or maybe if I lose a little weight, or maybe if I didn't fuss so much. No one has the right to put his hand on your person in a violent manner. No one.
Very good. Very good. That's excellent. What would you say to someone that's listening and they're isolated? Because during COVID-19, domestic violence rates went out the roof. I mean, they just went through the roof because so many people, we were stuck there in our homes, couldn't go anywhere, and the hotlines were blowing up all over the country. For women and men that are in a domestic violent relationship, what advice would you give them as it relates to isolation?
Well, the first point I want to bring from that statement, Attorney Stewart, is that domestic violence does not discriminate. Of course, disproportionately, women suffer this evil more than men. But there are many instances when men are also victim of domestic violence. So it does not discriminate. This is just an evil behavior who's out to control and take advantage of the victim. In terms of what you should do, if you have those feelings of isolation, tell somebody. We all have these feelings of I can make it, or it can't happen to me, but we are human. If you find yourself in a situation where the abuser is trying to isolate you, that's not because he loves you so much. That's a form of control. So when it comes to isolation, break out of the pattern. Call your mother, call your father, call a friend. There's a hotline that's right there on the screen. Somebody under the sound of my voice, write down this hotline number. But don't allow yourself to be isolated. We'll get into it in just a few minutes, Attorney Smith, in terms of some of the things that you can do legally when you find yourself in an abusive relationship. But we'll talk about that also in just a minute.
Okay, that's very key, because we always want to provide a real remedy with this show. And so Bishop Smith is going to give you some steps and some information that you can take right now if you are being victimized by domestic violence. Bishop Smith, what would you say to the men that are watching? Bishop Smith was a guest twice on TVONE. He did a phenomenal job on TVONE, and Bishop Smith, Attorney Smith, discussed domestic violence on TVONE. There on the show, a young woman from St. Louis was actually murdered in a violent situation. And Bishop Smith was a guest on the show giving legal information about what to do in a domestic violence situation. But oftentimes men are victims, but they don't say anything because they're ashamed. Bishop Smith, what would you say to the men out there that, the women are slapping them, pulling out pistols and cussing them out? What would you say to these men that are embarrassed to come forth?
It's the same thing as we've repeatedly said. This evil does not discriminate. Yes, there are often times when men are victim of domestic violence, and sometimes the men find themselves more shame and guilt about coming forth. But the same gun violence can be used to injure men, to injure a man as well as a female. So, man, if you find yourself in the midst of a situation, the same advice I give to you is the same advice I give to the ladies. Don't allow yourself to be isolated. And if you feel yourself in a situation, because really what domestic violence come down to in a nutshell, that is not love. It's a form of control. It's a form of control. And you cannot allow people to control you to the point that you think that you deserve the violence, or that, man, you're so embarrassed that the men at the plant or the guys that I play basketball, if it gets out that my wife or my fiance slapped me or did something like that, pain is pain and hurt is hurt. So don't sit in silence. Tell somebody, because that's how these abusive individuals like to operate. In isolation, they want to keep you locked away, keep you one-on-one, so that you can feel as if you are totally and completely dependent on them and them only.
Very good. Very good. You were talking about some of the warning signs, and you did a phenomenal job of discussing that. There's this ideology or studies, and lots of this information has come from the National Domestic Abuse body of work. So if you want to get more information on this subject matter, contact or Google the National Abuse Violent Hotline, or go to their website, because a lot of this information have come from their website and some of the studies that they have conducted and some of the links that they have connected with their body of work. Now, there is what we call this four-part cycle of abuse. Four-part cycle of abuse. And it deals with how the abuser, you can see the warning signs of when this abuse is getting ready to take place. Bishop Smith, can you tell our listeners about this four-part cycle of abuse?
So, attorney, you broke off just a little bit, but I believe where we're going is the warning signs regarding the four-point cycle of abuse.
Yeah, I must have had an internet interruption there.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize. But what we're discussing now, if my internet was interrupted, I am asking Attorney Smith to share with you this four-part cycle of abuse and what some of the things that you should recognize if you are in a situation and you're not sure what is taking place. So, Bishop Smith, can you share with our listeners, please?
Typically, the way this vicious cycle operates is that first there's some type of a tension that builds up. Abusive partner often may lash out in response to something that happened at work. It may have been a situation where he was terminated. There's some external stressor, as we call it. It may have been a bad day when he was hanging out with the fellas, or it may be a situation where he had a disagreement, or it may be in some situation, it may be that the tension comes because of financial struggles and problems. Now, I want you to understand, I am not saying that this stress justifies the abuse. It
Absolutely.
does not. It does not. You know, sometimes when I minister from my pulpit, I tell the people of the Lord that everybody's going through something. But just because I get laid out just because I get laid out at work, does not mean I should come out and lay out my wife. That's crazy. So number one, you usually see some type of tension that builds. And then once this tension builds, because this abuser does not have the skills or the spirituality to deal with a stressful situation, he comes home and there's usually an incident of abuse or an incident of violence, which means that he usually physically assaults his wife or his girlfriend, or some type of a physical, emotional, psychological abuse that the abuser lets out. In his mind, he's letting out his tension and his stress. Man, go to the gym and learn how to play basketball or something, but don't take it out on your wife. And then after he blows up, he takes out the abuse, then he comes back and he wants to reconcile. In other words, you know, I didn't mean to do it, sweetheart, or I'm sorry, or I just had a bad day at work. You know I love you. Ladies, let me tell you, he should not hit you at all. But if he hits you one time, you might want to consider changing your address. So you have this stress that builds up. The stress gets to the point he comes home, he takes it out on his significant other, and then he wants to make up, you know, reconcile. I'm sorry. He tells that lie, I'll never do it again, or you made me do it. But something to try to reconcile with you. And then the fourth stage is that there's usually a calm. You know, the abuse has taken place, you know, things have calmed down, but oftentimes the storm is right before the calm. And then you go right back through this cycle of abuse. Ladies, either walk away, you know, if he won't get counseling, he won't get help, because unfortunately, you can only keep going around this merry-go-round over and over and over before you have some serious injuries, physically, emotionally, or otherwise. So ladies, men, if you're caught up in it, it's time to break this cycle of abuse.
Oh, that was excellent. That was excellent. And it was so heartfelt, because I do think most people are not aware. They, like you said earlier in the program you said they tend to blame themselves. He had a bad day at work. She had a bad day at work. But ultimately, you have to recognize that it is a cycle. Let's ask about a woman for a second, and we're going to ask you about a man. But let's ask a question. Women tend to stay oftentimes because they're embarrassed and they don't have any money, and he's the breadwinner. What advice would you give a lady, a woman, an older woman, a younger woman that doesn't have the means of self-sufficiency and she's afraid to leave? What would you say to her?
What I'm going to say to her, if she doesn't have the means to leave, if she doesn't have the finances to leave, she doesn't have the resources to leave, here's my advice to you. Leave anyways. Leave anyhow. Because if you stay in that relationship, you're either going to end up in a hospital or 6 feet under. Attorney Stewart mentioned a few minutes ago that from time to time, I do appear as a guest expert, legal expert, on a television show entitled Fatal Attraction. And in this particular relationship, what Monica cites, the victim, she didn't leave, you all. She kept going back, thinking that perhaps it would work. And eventually she did break off the relationship, but she stayed too long. And I'm not blaming her. It's the deranged man that did the harm to her. but she stayed in that relationship probably longer than she wanted to. And unfortunately, the abuse resulted in her untimely death. So ladies, if you don't have the money, call your girlfriend. If you don't have the resources, call your mother, call your father. There are support mechanism in place. You have the 1-800 number that will be shown again shortly on the screen. But if you stay in that situation, oftentimes it results in serious physical injury or even in the death of the abused individual. Now, the other thing that I do want to add, Attorney Stewart, is that there is something that's called a red flag. There is something that's called a red flag. Now, sometimes when you meet people, they seem like the nicest person on planet Earth. Sometimes when you meet a man, he seems nice, he's got it together, but there are warning signs of an abuser. There are warning signs. We call them red flag in a legal perspective. And if you see certain red flags, ladies, I don't care how tall he is. I don't care how much money he's making. If you see too many of these red flags, it's time to exit. Let me just give you a couple of these red flags that if you see, it's time to get out of there. Number one, if he's jealous and possessive, jealousy is one of those red flags. Now, I love my wife, and I don't want to see anybody else, step into her in a manner that they shouldn't. But that's not the type of jealousy I'm talking about. The type of jealousy I'm talking about that leads to rage and violence is that when he says stupid stuff like, "I saw you looking at Bobby. I saw you looking at Bobby, and you don't even know no Bobby." That's a red flag. Another red flag when it comes to this abusive type behavior is somebody that is controlling behavior. He picks out your clothes for you. I mean, it's okay to have an input, but he wants to go shopping for you. He only wants you to wear certain colors. He wants you to wear your hair a certain way. He wants you to wear certain type of earrings. He wants you to check in every 25 minutes, every 10 minutes. That's a controlling behavior. And then here's another one that you really have to watch out for. He always blames you for his problems. You're the reason I can't keep a job. You're the reason why the house is not clean. You're the reason why I can't get to that level of success. That controlling behavior when he blames you for everything. Those are some red flags. There are others out there, but definitely when you see those. Now, this video, as Attorney Stewart has said earlier, that this is for informational purposes only. But if you start seeing these patterns, you need to get some professional help or reconsider whether or not that's the type of relationship you really want to stay in.
Very good. I love that. I love the red flags and the whole jealousy thing. I think women overlook that, and men, because I think sometimes it feeds the ego, when there's a little jealousy. But when it's going too far, you have to recognize that as a warning sign. Now, let's look at domestic violence in the church, because we don't like to talk about domestic violence in the church. It's the silent subject. Because the pastor, the bishop, the minister, the elder, the missionary, the evangelist, the female pastors, we don't want to think that these individuals are capable of this behavior, but they are. And there are so many instances of abuse in the church. What advice would you have for men and women that are suffering in the church but afraid to come forth because of the damage that it will do to the image?
Attorney Stewart, first of all, thank you for asking that question. Here's what I tell people when it comes to domestic violence and the church. You have domestic violence in every area of our society. School teachers are victim of domestic violence. We see it in the legal arena. Doctors are victims of domestic violence. Athletes are victim of domestic violence. So why would it not be in the church? It's in every area of our society. And oftentimes you see it in the church. Now, let me distinguish. There's a difference between it being in the church when I say the church building versus the body of Christ. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not going to get too preachy on you, but I do want you to understand that there's a distinction. One may attend the church, and if he is caught up in committing domestic violence and he's abusive to his wife, that is not biblical, because the Bible tells us to love our wives as the Lord Jesus loved the church. But notwithstanding that, if you are a victim of domestic violence and you are a member of a church, the first thing you should do is go and tell your pastor. And if the pastor, God forbids, if it is the pastor that's committing the ungodly act of domestic violence, you should go to whoever is in the hierarchy of that organization. Don't sit there in the pulpit and suffer domestic violence. I don't see how you can listen to the man preach and then when you get home, he's going to give you a whooping. That's just kind of difficult for me to accept. So even if it's in the church, I've counseled people in this area, and unfortunately I've heard ladies say things such as, I would come forth sooner, but I didn't want to interfere, or I didn't want to mess up his position as the pastor. Mm-hmm. Well, if he's doing that, he shouldn't be pastoring anybody. He need to get out the pulpit, go get some help, and then we'll have a conversation later. But number one, even in the church, and I know some are saying, well, Pastor Smith, if it's happening to me, I'm going to pray about it. That's okay to pray about it. But don't sit there and take it and acknowledge it does happen in the church building. It does happen. So the same concept apply. Don't allow yourself to be isolated. Don't take the blame for his shortcoming, but tell somebody, even if you have to in a few minutes, even if you have to call 911. And we're going to talk about the legal aspect of domestic violence also. But don't take it in the church, out of the church, around the church. It's not God's will.
Very good. Very good. How do we create a pipeline for help in the church when people are afraid to report this information because they do not want to damage this image that they have? And I heard you say we move up the hierarchies and go up to the top and to share the abuse that's taking place. But as you know, that's not taking place. How can we get them the help that they need? What advice would you share now to get that person out of that situation? Because she knows she cannot go up. Because if she goes up, lots of times they're not going to do anything.
Okay. So if there is no mechanism in the organization that allows you to report violence, if there is no mechanism in the organization that allows you to go out to file a grievance or anything of that nature, then go outside of the four walls of the church. It's illegal to strike and to hurt other human beings. If you need to, bring law enforcement involved. Legally, you're not supposed, you can't just go around abusing people. So if there is no mechanism in the church, there is, number one, I think you need to leave that church. If there is domestic violence and you are being abused, and you go to your pastor and he does not address it, and there's no mechanism for you to air your problem, I think you need to leave that church. I'm all for praying. You know, sometimes when I counsel people, I don't do it as much as I used to. But when my wife and I counsel married people, you know, that's one of the issues we bring out. You know, is there anything going on in this relationship that we need to know about? My wife will counsel the wife, and I will counsel the husband. And the question that we ask each of these individuals is there anything in the marriage or in the relationship that is creating a problem? And there have been some times when I just straight up ask, is there abuse? So if there's no mechanism inside of the church, then go outside of the church, but don't stay there and take that abuse.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Do not stay there and take the abuse. Get help. Call these national lines, hotlines that we are putting up, and get the help that you need, because tomorrow may be your last day. Mm-hmm. And you do not want to create this image for your children, because remember, domestic violence tends to take on a generational nature. Mm-hmm. Give us the legal advice and solutions for domestic violence.
Thank you. Number one, from a legal perspective, if he hits you, call law enforcement. Dial 911. Let the person knows who answered a 911 call that I'm being abused, that someone is striking me, someone is hitting me, someone is kicking me. Get law enforcement involved. Secondly, once you've got the abuser away from you, because the law, and most time, you know, domestic violence is such an intense atmosphere that percentage-wise, there is a substantial high number of law enforcement officers that are injured as a result of trying to break up domestic violence. Mm-hmm. And law enforcement will tell you that it's such an intense situation that when it happens, they will arrive and scene. There's some in some states and some municipalities, there are specially trained individuals in law enforcement who is trained to diffuse this situation. So number one, dial 111, dial 911, and get yourself some help and get out of that physically abusive situation. Secondly, in our legal system, ladies, don't you know that you can go right to the courthouse, and in most jurisdictions, in most states, you can just fill out a document and ask the judge for a restraining order right there on the spot. There is something that's called ex parte appearance. In other words, when you go to court, you're really not supposed to go to court unless the other side showed up. But our legal system now realize that this is such a tense situation that, ladies, if you find yourself in an abusive relationship, go to the courthouse. You can ask the bailiff, the clerk, hey, I need a protection of order. You can fill it out, give it over to the authorities, and based upon your document, the judge will issue in almost every jurisdiction an ex parte restraining order, and they will find that person and serve them with the papers and say that you have to stay 1,000 feet away. You can't come to the house. And sometimes the abusers will say stupid stuff like, if you take me to court, I'm going to get the children. Well, in that ex parte order, it's a temporary order, but it's still the strength of law. The judge will say that he can't come to the house. He can't come within 100 feet of the children. He can't come within 200 feet of your place of employment. And then what'll happen, it does not, the thing that it does, number one, it gets you out of harm's way. It gets you away from the abuser. And if he violates that order, if you violate a court order, it's a criminal offense and he can be locked out. And what the judge will do, I'm sorry, he can be locked up. And what the judge will do, he'll issue, or she will issue that temporary restraining order. Now, the judge will set a hearing, maybe a week to 10 days down the road, and then you get a chance to come into court and explain to the judge why you need this order to go from temporary to permanent. Okay, but the legal system has caught up in most cases. There's still areas where the legal system needs to improve, but it's better than it used to be. Just to give you a brief history of the ex parte order, it used to be 40, 50, 60 years ago, the poor wife or the wife would call because she's being abused. The officer would walk in and say, I didn't see anything, I don't know anything, so I can't arrest anybody. But thank God those laws have changed. So if you call law enforcement, they have the authority to diffuse that situation, whether it's arresting somebody or removing somebody. You can go in the middle of the night in most states, in most jurisdictions, fill out that restraining order and get him away from you. So the legal system is in your corner. And then, of course, hire an expert in the area of domestic violence law or family law. Years ago, I used to practice in that area. I don't do it as much now, but there are lawyers that are specifically trained to handle not just divorce cases, but they're specifically trained to handle domestic violence cases, because you can have domestic violence and not have a marital relationship.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. How would these individuals, can you connect them or give them some information, just some basic information on how to go to the court? Because now they have a kiosk that's available to people where they can go into the courthouses and people will walk them through the process.
I literally tell people sometimes when they call me and say, Attorney Smith, will you take my case? And I have to explain to them that because of the practice, I don't handle cases in that area. But it's today you can literally go to the courthouse, and the first official you see, the first employer that you see who works with the courthouse, there's a specific, oftentimes in a lot of courts, there are specific divisions, there are specific judges, there is specific personnel. They do nothing but handle domestic violence matters. It's such a high priority and such a problematic situation that you can go and just tell them. You may not know the name of the judge. You may not know whether it's Division 22 or whether it's the circuit court or the chancery court or the civil court. Just get to the courthouse and tell the bailiff or tell the clerk, hey, I have just been abused physically and I need an order of protection. And often courts, they will walk you there. They will take you to the proper areas where you can get the information that you need. You can even go onto in most jurisdictions, you can go onto the website of courts. I live here in St. Louis City. I practice in St. Louis City and St. Louis County. You can go onto the website of those courts, and they will tell you the names of the individuals in terms of who you can request when you physically arrive. But the key is, this is one of those things that you have to do for yourself. Amen. The unfortunate thing about domestic violence, and we were talking about a cycle of violence earlier, the violence will not stop until you are ready for it to stop. Let me say that again. You have the power, the strength to stop the violence. You can call law enforcement, you can call the judge, your court, but the violence stops when you make up in your mind, enough is enough. I'm not going to take it anymore. You were not made to be abused by a man or anyone. So I know it's not as easy as it may sound, but ladies, I'm telling you, you have the strength, you have the ability, you have the determination to remove yourself from that violent situation. I believe in you. I believe in you.
It's very good. It's very encouraging, and it's very empowering to women and men that are in this situation. And basically, just to put it in a nutshell, the courts are user friendly for individuals who are victims of domestic violence. Almost anyone would help you. And you don't have to be in fear of failing, fear of not knowing who to speak to. I'm not educated. I'm not a lawyer. You know, I didn't finish high school. I don't know what to say. No one cares about that. All people care about is the fact that they want you to live and to be safe. Bishop Smith, you have done a tremendous job. You have done an outstanding job. We love having you on Legal Views. You come with so much information to help so many people. You're just an outstanding guest. Before we sign off, is there anything you would like to share, anything you would like to say to have the last few words?
Yes, thank you, Attorney Stewart. And once again, we appreciate you. We appreciate you for sharing this platform. Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R. Stewart. Thank you for the contribution that you are making to our society with this platform. I just want to end my brief time with you by simply restating something that I've said before. No one has the right to put his hand on you in a violent manner. No one has the right to subject you to emotional or physical or psychological abuse. That's not why you were put on earth. And sometimes things happen in life. And ladies, if you find yourself in one of these type of situations, the reoccurring thing that you keep hearing from Attorney Smith or Bishop Smith, whichever one you want today, his answer is the same on this one. Bishop Smith and Attorney Smith, it's the same answer. Leave that situation. Don't let someone make you feel as if you're 100% dependent on them and they are abusing you. You have the strength, you have the power, you have the fortitude to rise up in strength and not just get yourself out of it. What about your son? What about your daughter? Attorney Stewart said a few minutes ago, if we're not careful, domestic violence can be a generational situation. The little boy, 8 years old, 9 years old, he sees dad abusing mother, and he thinks that's the way it's supposed to be. The young lady, she sees her mother being abused, whether it's psychologically or emotionally, and she thinks that's the way it should be. So ladies, if you're not going to do it for yourself, which I pray that you do it for your son, your daughter, your next generation. And I am cheering for you. I'm praying for you. And if you find yourself in the midst of a domestic relationship, dial that 1-800 number, 1-800-799-7233, or dial 911 and get out of that situation. Absolutely. I'm cheering for you, and I believe that you can do it. God bless you.
God bless you, Bishop Smith. And we are cheering for you, and we are praying for you. Thank you for tuning in to Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R. Stewart and our special guest on today, Attorney Bishop Melvin J. Smith. We will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R. Stewart.